Government-suppressed Bigfoot proof from a lost SAR mission. I'm about to show you evidence that could land me in federal prison, October 2019. Missing geology student in Oregon's restricted watershed zone. When my search and rescue team found her tent, it was shredded outward. Something inside had torn its way out. Our military-trained dogs went catatonic with fear. The footprints circling her camp measured 18 inches with perfect toe articulation. Tree breaks 14 feet high showed deliberate intelligence. Then our thermal cameras caught it 9 feet tall, studying us from the darkness with tactical precision. We found the missing woman alive in an elaborate shelter, unconscious but impossibly warm in freezing temperatures. Her camera contained 400 photos of massive hands, amber eyes reflecting non-human angles, and a face that was almost human. Within an hour, black helicopters arrived. Federal agents confiscated everything and threatened us with life imprisonment if we talked. But I kept her memory card. What are they hiding in those restricted zones? My name is Tom Brenner, and what I'm about to tell you could land me in federal prison. Every morning, I wake up thinking, maybe today's the day I finally talk. Well, today's that day. For 22 years, I coordinated search and rescue operations out of Wallowa County, Oregon. That's the northeast corner of the state, if you don't know it about as remote as Oregon gets. I had a 94% success rate finding missing hikers, hunters, climbers. The 6% I didn't find still visit me at night, but that's not why I'm recording this. It was October 15th, 2019, when the call came in about Riley Cheng. Tuesday morning, I remember because I was late getting to the office after dealing with a flat tire. My deputy, Marcia, had already pulled the file and laid it out on my desk. Stanford PhD candidate, geology department, age 28. She'd gone into the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest alone to document some kind of rare quartz formations for her dissertation. Her check-in call to her advisor was 4 days overdue. Nothing about that initial report suggested this would be anything other than routine. Young academic, probably got turned around or twisted an ankle. We get a dozen of these every summer, though October was pushing it for solo research trips. The weather can turn fast up there. One day it's 50 degrees and sunny. The next you're looking at snow and negative wind chills. But then I noticed something in her permit paperwork that made me pause. Riley had somehow gotten clearance for the restricted watershed zone near Eagle Cap Wilderness. That's not easy to do. That area has been under special federal management since the 70s, supposedly to protect the water supply for 3 counties. Though in 22 years, I'd never seen a single water quality station up there. The few times I'd needed to search that zone, it took days of bureaucratic hassle to get approval. Riley had gotten it in 48 hours. I assembled my standard team that afternoon. Doug Hutchins, former Marine, best tracker I've ever worked with. Janet Reeves and her partner Carl Morrison, both wilderness EMTs with a decade of experience. We had 2 tracking dogs, German Shepherds named Max and Duchess, trained specifically for alpine search work. I've seen those dogs find people buried under 10 feet of avalanche snow. They've never let me down. The briefing was straightforward. Riley's planned route would take her 18 miles into the backcountry, following established trails for the first 12, then bushwhacking to her research site. She'd filed all the right paperwork, left detailed GPS coordinates, even provided a return date. Everything you want to see from a solo hiker. Her vehicle, a 2016 RAV4, was supposed to be at the Boundary Creek trailhead, but I kept coming back to that permit. In my desk drawer, and I'm looking at it right now as I record this, I have a copy of her application. There's a handwritten note in the margin from someone at the Forest Service, approved per Protocol 7. I've never found out what Protocol 7 means. Believe me, I've tried. I also have, hidden in my attic behind boxes of Christmas decorations, a SanDisk SD card labeled RC Evidence, 64 gigabytes. It contains 417 photographs that officially don't exist, taken by a woman who officially rescued herself, showing things that officially aren't there. The federal agents who made me sign a 12-page NDA under threat of prosecution under the Espionage Act, if you can believe that, they thought they got all the evidence. They cataloged everything, numbered every item, had assigned chain of custody forms in triplicate. But in the chaos of that extraction, with helicopters landing and radios squawking and everyone shouting over the rotor wash, nobody noticed me palm that little piece of plastic and swap it for a blank. 5 years. 5 years I've kept my mouth shut while 17 other people have gone missing in those same restricted zones. 17 families who got back loved ones with no memories and official reports that make no sense. All of them drawing the same symbols when they think nobody's watching. I can't stay quiet anymore. That Tuesday afternoon, we loaded into the Forest Service helicopter at the Enterprise Municipal Airport. The flight to Boundary Creek Trailhead takes about 25 minutes, beats the 3-hour drive on logging roads that would have rattled our teeth loose. Doug sat across from me, already studying the topo maps, marking likely spots where someone might shelter or take a wrong turn. Janet was checking medical supplies while Carl ran through the radio frequencies with dispatch. The pilot, Rich Dombrowski, had flown missions with us for 8 years. As we lifted off, he turned back and said something that stuck with me. Weather Service is calling for a system moving in Thursday night. You've got maybe 60 hours before things get ugly up there. 60 hours. In search and rescue, we live and die by the 72-hour window. That's when your chances of finding someone alive drop by half. Riley's file painted a picture of someone who knew what she was doing. She'd published papers on mineral formations in remote locations across 3 continents. Her equipment list included a satellite GPS beacon, though it had stopped transmitting 3 days earlier. That could mean a dead battery, damaged equipment, or worse. But her experience suggested she'd know how to handle wilderness emergencies. From the helicopter, the Wallowa Whitman spread out below us like a rumpled green blanket thrown over sharp granite bones. This late in October, the high meadows had gone brown, and the larches were turning gold entire hillsides that looked like they were on fire in the afternoon sun. Beautiful country, but unforgiving. The temperature differential between day and night could be 40 degrees. One wrong turn off a trail, and you could walk for days without hitting a road. Rich set us down in a small clearing near the trailhead at 3:40 p.m. Riley's RAV4 sat exactly where it should be, covered in a fine layer of dust and pine needles. The parking permit on the dashboard was dated October 11th, 4 days ago. Janet checked the doors locked. Through the window, we could see her day pack wasn't inside, which meant she'd taken it with her as planned. Good sign. Max and Duchess immediately picked up a scent from a hair tie we'd gotten from Riley's apartment. They pulled northeast, exactly along her planned route. Another good sign. We made strong time those first 6 miles, the dogs confident, tails up and moving with purpose. The trail was clear, well maintained, mostly flat as it followed Boundary Creek upstream. Doug ranged ahead and behind, reading sign I couldn't see. About 2 hours in, he stopped and knelt beside the trail. "Boot print," he said, pointing to a partial impression in dried mud. "Merrill, women's size 7 or 8. 3, maybe 4 days old." It matched the boots Riley had listed on her equipment form. As we gained elevation, the forest changed. Douglas firs and ponderosa pines gave way to subalpine fir and mountain hemlock. The undergrowth thinned out, and the trail became rockier. We passed through stands of those golden larches, their needles carpeting the trail like coins. Every few hundred yards, Doug found another sign, a scuff mark on a rock, a broken spider web at head height, disturbed moss on a log crossing. Riley had definitely come this way. At mile 8, we reached the junction where Riley would have left the main trail. A carved wooden sign pointed east toward Eagle Cap, north toward Cached Lake. According to her itinerary, she'd have gone northwest, bushwhacking toward a series of unnamed ridges where she believed the quartz formations were located. This is where things typically go wrong, leaving established trails for rough country. But the dogs didn't hesitate. They pulled us northwest into a thick stand of lodgepole pines, following what looked like a game trail. Doug found another boot print almost immediately. "She knew this was here," he said. "This isn't random wandering. She'd scouted this route." The restricted watershed boundary was marked only by faded orange blazes on trees, easy to miss if you weren't looking. We crossed it at 5:20 p.m., technically entering federal jurisdiction. I'd gotten the appropriate permissions, but it had taken 4 phone calls and a formal written request. How had a graduate student managed it with 1 application? As the sun dropped behind the western ridges, painting the peaks orange and pink, we picked up our pace. We had maybe 90 minutes of good light. To left. The dogs were pulling harder now, more urgent. In my experience, that meant one of two things. We were getting close, or they were picking up distress signals, fear pheromones that linger at sites where something bad happened. That's when we found her camp. We smelled it before we saw it. That mix of synthetic fabric and spilled food that tells you something violent happened. The dogs hit it first. Both Max and Duchess stopped dead about 50 yards out and started that low whining that makes the hair on your neck stand up. They'd been pulling hard on their leads for the last mile, and suddenly they wanted nothing to do with whatever was ahead. "Easy, girl," Janet murmured to Duchess, but I could hear the tension in her voice. These dogs had found bodies before. They'd worked avalanche sites, climbing accidents, even a small plane crash. They don't spook easy. The campsite, or what was left of it, sat in a small clearing surrounded by lodgepole pines. Riley had picked a good spot. Level ground, protection from wind, water source nearby at a small creek. We could hear babbling to the east. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a perfect backcountry camp. But nothing about this was normal. The tent, a high-end MSR Hubba Hubba that I recognized from her gear list, looked like someone had taken a knife to it. No, that's not right. The fabric wasn't cut. It was torn, shredded from the inside, pushing out, leaving long strips of orange nylon hanging like flags. The aluminum poles were bent at impossible angles, not broken but twisted like someone had grabbed them and just pulled. "Jesus," Carl breathed beside me. Riley's sleeping bag, a north face-down mummy bag rated to 0 degrees, lay halfway out of the tent, ripped along its entire length. White goose down covered everything like snow, stirred into little drifts by the evening breeze. But no blood. I checked carefully, even got down on my hands and knees with my flashlight. Not a single drop. Her research equipment was scattered across maybe 50 yards. I found her geological hammer 20 feet up in a pine tree, wedged between branches like it had been thrown with tremendous force. Sample bags hung from bushes. Her field notebook, the pages covered in neat handwriting and diagrams, was torn in half, not along the binding, but straight through the middle, requiring strength I couldn't imagine. "Tom." Doug's voice was steady, but I'd worked with him long enough to hear the undercurrent. "You need to see this." He was standing at the edge of the clearing, his flashlight pointed at the ground. As I approached, my light joined his, and I felt my mouth go dry. The print was perfect. I mean, perfect. You could see the ball of the foot, the arch, 5 distinct toes, but it was 18 inches long and maybe 8 inches wide at the ball. The depression was at least 2 inches deep in the packed earth, suggesting something that weighed 4, maybe 500 pounds. "Bear?" Janet asked, though her voice said she knew better. Doug shook his head, kneeling beside the print. "Look at the toe arrangement. Big toe on the inside, just like ours. And here he pointed to the heel. That's not a bear's pad. That's a heel strike, like a human walking upright." We found more prints, dozens of them, forming a rough circle around the destroyed tent. The stride length was consistent, about 6 feet between steps. Whatever made these prints had walked around Riley's campsite multiple times, methodically, like it was examining everything. I radioed base while Doug and Carl started photographing everything. "Dispatch, this is Brenner. We've located the subject's campsite. Significant damage to equipment, no sign of the subject." "We're gonna need to say again about the damage?" Marsh's voice crackled back. I paused. "How do you explain this?" "Animal damage to the tent and equipment. Possible bear encounter." The lie came, automatically. I don't know why. Maybe because saying what I was really thinking would have sounded insane. Copy that. "Do you need wildlife management?" "Negative. We're going to establish camp and continue the search at first light." The sun was dropping fast now, painting the mountains crimson. We had maybe 30 minutes of usable light left. I made the call to set up our base camp about a half-mile back down the trail, far enough from Riley's sight, but still within quick hiking distance. As we gathered what we could salvage of Riley's equipment, I noticed something else. Her camera, a professional-grade Nikon DSLR that should have been in her tent, was missing. So was her satellite GPS beacon. But her wallet, phone, and car keys were right there in the tent's torn remains. Whatever happened here, it wasn't a robbery, and it wasn't random. I didn't sleep that first night. None of us did, really. We'd set up our tents in a tight cluster, backs to a rock face that gave us At least one direction we didn't have to watch. The dog stayed close, practically on top of Janet and Carl in their tent. Around midnight, Duchess started growling. Not her usual alert sound, but something deeper, more primal. Doug was on watch with me, both of us sitting by our small fire, and he had his thermal scope out scanning the perimeter. "Movement," he whispered. 2 o'clock, about 75 yards. I raised my own scope. The heat signature was big, too big for a deer, wrong shape for a bear. It was upright, moving between trees with a fluid grace that didn't match its size. Then it stopped and just watched us. For 20 minutes, this thing stood perfectly still behind a cluster of pines, observing our camp. "Height?" I asked Doug quietly. 8 feet, maybe more. It's partially behind that ridge, so hard to tell. When it finally moved away, it didn't crash through the brush like a spooked animal. It just melted back into the forest, silent as smoke. We heard tree branches snap in the distance, high up, 15 or 20 feet off the ground. Morning came gray and cold, maybe 35 degrees. Frost covered our tents, and our breath made clouds in the air. I gathered everyone for a quick brief before we went back to Riley's site. "Listen, what we saw yesterday, we document everything, but we keep it professional. No speculation in the radio chatter. We're here to find Riley. Period." Janet looked troubled. "Tom, those prints could be a hoax," I said, not believing it myself. "Someone playing games. We've seen it before." We hadn't, but I needed them focused. Back at Riley's campsite, dawnlight revealed details we'd missed. Doug found more prints leading away from the camp, heading northwest toward a thick stand of Douglas firs. The trail was clear, whatever made these prints wanted us to follow. That's when Doug made the observation that changed everything. "Tom, come here. Look at this print. Then this. 1. He was crouched between 2 impressions about 6 feet apart. See the pressure distribution? The way the toes dig in here, but not here? I looked, but didn't see what he was getting at. "This thing has a mid-tarsal break," he said quietly. "The foot bends in the middle, not just at the toes like ours. And look." He pointed to the ridge patterns in the print. Dermal ridges, like fingerprints, but on the foot. You can't fake that with wooden stompers or any kind of prosthetic. Doug had spent 8 years in Afghanistan tracking Taliban through mountains, not so different from these. He'd written papers on tracking techniques for the military. If he said these prints were real, they were real. We followed the trail for about 200 yards before finding the first tree break. 14 feet up, a Douglas fir as thick as my thigh had been twisted, not snapped, twisted until the wood fibers had separated in a spiral pattern. The break was fresh, sap still oozing, probably less than 2 days old. "That would take incredible torque," Carl said, touching the twisted wood. "I mean, hundreds of pounds of force applied rotationally." More breaks appeared as we continued, all at that same height, forming a rough path through the forest. It reminded me of how bears mark territory, except bears claw trees at maybe 6 or 7 feet. This was twice that height. Then Janet called out. She'd found something hanging from a branch, a sample bag, one of Riley's, containing what looked like hair. Long, reddish-brown strands, too coarse to be human, wrong color for any bear in these mountains. I bagged it carefully, though I didn't know why. Who would I even send it to? The trail led us another quarter-mile before we found the first structure. That's the only word for it, structure. 7 feet tall, made from branches woven together in a pattern that hurt to look at, like your eyes couldn't quite track how the pieces fit. It was fresh construction, the broken ends of branches still weeping sap. Inside the structure, arranged on a flat rock like an altar, were Riley's geological samples. Each rock was placed precisely, organized by size and color in concentric circles. Her geology hammer lay in the center, polished clean. "This is intentional," Janet whispered. "This is intelligence." I photographed everything, my hands steady despite the chill running down my spine. Whatever had taken Riley hadn't just attacked her camp. It had examined her things, understood their importance, and displayed them. It was trying to communicate. The smell hit us just as the sun touched the rich sulfur mixed with something musky, animal-like, but wrong somehow. Like a zoo smell, but wilder, more aggressive. Max and Duchess pressed against Janet's legs, their whole bodies trembling. We make camp here, I decided, pointing to a flat area with good sightlines. Half-mile from Riley's site, close enough to work, but far enough to I didn't finish. Far enough to what? Run? We worked in practice silence, everyone hyper-aware of the forest around us. Doug kept scanning the tree line while Carl and Janet set up our tents in a defensive semicircle. The dogs wouldn't leave the center of camp, wouldn't even investigate the perimeter like they normally would. As darkness fell, the forest went quiet. Not normal quiet, that absolute silence where even the insects stop. You don't realize how much background noise exists in the wilderness until it's gone. No birds settling for the night, no small animals rustling through undergrowth, nothing. Just our breathing and the sound of our own heartbeats. Then came the knocks. 3 sharp cracks, like someone hitting a baseball bat against a tree. They came from the north, maybe 200 yards out. We all froze. 30 seconds later, 3 knocks answered from the south. Then east. We were surrounded. Tree knocks, Doug said quietly. Classic territorial behavior in primates. What primates? Carl whispered. There are no primates in Oregon. Doug just looked at him. We all knew what he wasn't saying. I picked up a stick and knocked 3 times against a nearby tree. The response was immediate knocks from all 3 directions, closer now, maybe 100 yards. Then something new, a low, rumbling vocalization that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not quite a howl, not quite a roar. It resonated in my chest like standing too close to a subwoofer. Janet had the thermal scope. Jesus Christ. Tom, there's 3 of them. No, 4. They're moving, circling us. I looked through my own scope. The heat signatures were massive, upright, coordinated in their movements. They stayed just outside our light circle, in that perfect zone where we could sense them but not see them clearly. One would move, then stop. Another would advance to a new position. They were testing us, learning our reactions. At midnight, the smell intensified. It rolled through camp in waves, so strong it made my eyes water. Carl actually gagged. The dogs were practically catatonic with fear, pressed flat against the ground, not even whimpering anymore. That's when we saw the eyes. Eye shine, reflecting our flashlights. But the height was all wrong. Those eyes were 9 feet off the ground, and the spacing suggested a face much wider than any human's. When I moved my light, they didn't flee like a normal animal. They just blinked, slowly, deliberately, and kept watching. Doug had his rifle out a Remington 7-100 he always carried for wildlife protection. Should I? No, I said immediately. Something told me that would be a mistake. We're in their territory. We don't escalate. Around 3 a.m., they started moving closer. We could hear breathing now, deep, rhythmic breathing from multiple directions. One of them must have been within 20 feet of our tent. I could smell it, hear its footsteps, each one, making the ground vibrate slightly. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The presence withdrew, the forest sound slowly returned, and that oppressive feeling lifted. Dawn came like a blessing, gray and cold, but wonderfully normal. We found the prints in the morning. They'd walked circles around our camp all night, dozens of overlapping tracks. At one point, we found where one had sat and watched us 2 huge depressions where it had planted itself, handprints on either side where it had leaned back. They'd been studying us as much as we'd been searching for Riley. Day 2 changed everything we thought we knew. We started at first light, following fresh tracks that led northwest from our camp. The prints were different now, deeper, more urgent, with longer strides. Whatever made them had been moving fast, almost running. 2 miles in, we found the tree breaks Doug had mentioned. But seeing them in daylight was different. The pattern was deliberate every 100 yards or so, a tree twisted at exactly 14 to 16 feet high. The consistency was unnerving. This wasn't random territorial marking, it was a trail, a highway through the forest that no human would notice from the ground. It's using these as waypoints, Doug said, mapping the breaks on his GPS. Look, they form an almost perfect line toward that ridgeline. The birds had gone quiet again. That's never a good sign. Janet's dogs pulled backward on their leashes, actively fighting against going forward. We should have listened to them. The smell came back, stronger than before, And with it, a sound I'll never forget, a whistle, but not like any human whistle. It had harmonics to it, layers of sound that made my teeth ache. It came from ahead, then was answered from behind. We were being herded. Back to back, Doug commanded, his military training kicking in. 360 security. That's when we saw the structures, not just one, but 5 of them, arranged in a rough semicircle. Each one was more complex than the last. The first was the simple teepee shape we'd found yesterday. But the others showed progression, learning, improvement. The last one was architectural, with supporting beams and cross-bracing, using a natural rock face as one wall. Inside the most elaborate structure, we found Riley's equipment arranged like a museum display. Her rock samples were sorted by type and size. Her camping stove had been disassembled, each piece laid out in order. Her research notes were stacked neatly, held down by stones. Carl picked up her field notebook. The last entry was dated October 14th, 3 days ago. Incredible quartz formation at grid reference. Samples collected. Heard wood knocks last night. Very close. We'll investigate tomorrow. But there were new pages after that. Pages covered in drawings that weren't in Riley's handwriting, style geometric patterns, symbols that repeated in .com sequences. They looked almost like language, but not quite. Like someone trying to understand writing by copying its shapes. Tom. Janet's voice was barely a whisper. She was standing at the back of the structure, her flashlight illuminating the rock wall. There were handprints on the wall, dozens of them, made with what looked like mud or clay. But the size the hands were easily twice the size of mine, with fingers proportionally longer, and among them, small human handprints. Riley's size. Doug found the hair first, caught on a branch at head height for us. Long, auburn strands that looked almost human, but with a texture that was off. Too thick, too coarse. When I held it up to the light, it had an unusual banding pattern, like nothing I'd seen before. We bagged everything, documented every angle, every detail. My camera's memory card was filling up fast. That's when I noticed something else: scratches on the trees around the structures, but not random claw marks. They had patterns, repetition. The same symbols from Riley's notebook. The whistle came again, closer, through the trees, maybe 40 yards away. A shadow moved. Massive, upright, watching. When it shifted, I saw the profile for just a second. A conical head, shoulders impossibly broad, arms that hung past its knees. Then it was gone, vanished into the forest like smoke. "We need to call this in," Carl said, his voice shaking. "We need backup. We need—" "No," I cut him off, surprising myself. "We find Riley first. That's the job." But I was starting to understand we weren't just looking for a missing hiker anymore. We were in the middle of something much bigger, something that had been hidden in these mountains long before we arrived. And whatever had taken Riley didn't want to hurt her. It wanted to understand her. I tried calling for backup that morning, but dispatch wasn't having it. "Tom, you're in a restricted zone. I need federal clearance to send anyone else in." "There." Marcia's voice crackled through the satellite radio, frustration bleeding through the static. "We have a missing person and evidence of—" I stopped. Evidence of what? Giant footprints? Tree structures? How do you explain something that officially doesn't exist? Evidence of what, Tom? Possible wildlife interaction. Large predator, maybe a grizzly. The lie came easier this time. We need at least 2 more teams to expand the search grid. Grizzlies haven't been confirmed in the Wallowas since the 1930s. "I know what I'm seeing. Marcia." There was a long pause. "I'll make some calls. But Tom, if this becomes a wildlife issue, you know I have to notify Fish and Wildlife. They'll want to send their own people. That was the last thing we needed: more agencies, more questions. Just get me the backup. We're running out of time." While waiting for word on reinforcements, we followed a game trail that led deeper into the watershed. The prints were everywhere now. Not just the huge ones, but smaller ones too. Still larger than human, but maybe juvenile? The implications of that made my stomach turn. We weren't dealing with a single creature. This was a population. Doug found the digging sites first, areas where something had been pulling up roots, but with a methodical approach that suggested knowledge, not random foraging. The camas bulbs, a traditional food source for native tribes, had been carefully extracted, the good ones taken, the immature ones left to grow. Hand impressions in the disturbed soil showed fingers, an opposable thumb, deliberate selection. On the trees around these areas, we found more markings. Not claw marks like a bear would leave, but scratches that formed patterns. The same symbols from Riley's notebook, carved into bark at heights ranging from 8 to 15 feet. Different heights meant different individuals. They were leaving messages for each other. Tom, Carl's voice was tight. He was 50 yards ahead, standing very still. Don't make any sudden movements, but look up. 2 o'clock, in that big fir. I looked. At first, I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted to the shadows, and my breath caught. It was there, maybe 60 feet up, partially hidden behind the trunk. One massive hand gripped the tree, fingers longer than seemed possible. I could see part of a shoulder, covered in reddish-brown hair, and the edge of a face, a heavy brow, deep-set eyes that caught the light like a nocturnal animal's. It was watching us. Had probably been watching us all morning. Doug slowly raised his camera, but the moment he did, the thing moved. Not down, across. It went from tree to tree through the canopy, branches that should have snapped under that weight, barely bending. It moved like an orangutan, but faster, more purposeful. In seconds, it was gone, leaving only swaying branches. "Did you get it?" I asked Doug. He checked his camera, shook his head. "Just blur. It's too fast." We pressed on, following the trail as it wound upward toward a series of granite cliffs. The dogs were practically useless now, whimpering constantly, having to be dragged forward. Janet finally gave up and tied them to a tree with water and food. They'd be safer there than with us. The trail led to another structure, but this one was different. Built against a rock face, using the natural overhang as a roof. Inside, we found a cache, dozens of pine cones sorted by type, and strips of dried meat hanging from wooden pegs driven into cracks in the rock. The construction showed planning, tool use, food preservation. This wasn't just intelligence. This was culture. That's when we heard it, a whistle, but complex, almost like language. It came from above us on the cliff. When we looked up, there were 3 of them, silhouetted against the sky, watching. Night 3, October 17th. Everything changed. We'd set camp in a defensible position, backs against a cliff face, clear sight lines in 3 directions. Doug had insisted on a watch rotation, 2 people awake at all times. Janet and Carl took first watch while Doug and I tried to sleep. Around 11 p.m., Janet woke me with a hand over my mouth. "Thermal scope," she whispered. "You need to see this." I crawled out of my tent and took the scope. 200 yards out, clear as day in the infrared, a figure stood upright behind a cluster of pines. It was massive. The heat signature suggested something close to 9 feet tall, and probably 500 pounds. But it wasn't just standing there. It was moving between specific positions, stopping at each one for exactly the same amount of time. "It's been doing that for 20 minutes, Janet whispered. 8 positions, 30 seconds each, like clockwork. Doug was already up, his rifle across his knees. "It's studying us," he said quietly. "Testing our responses, learning our patterns." The figure moved to a new position, and this time I saw its full profile in the thermal. The conical shape of the head, arms that reached past its knees, a forward-leaning posture that somehow still looked graceful. It settled into a crouch, and for 10 minutes, it just observed us. "I'm going to try something," I said, an idea forming. I stood up slowly, hands visible, and walked to the edge of our camp's light circle. The figure didn't move. I raised my hand and waved a slow, deliberate gesture. For a moment, nothing. Then the figure stood, and I swear to God, it waved back. The same slow, deliberate motion, mirror perfect. "Jesus Christ," Carl breathed. I sat down cross-legged on the ground, trying to appear non-threatening. The figure watched for another moment, then mimicked the action, folding itself down into a sitting position. We stayed like that for maybe 5 minutes, 2 species regarding each other across 200 yards of darkness. Then Doug made a mistake. He shifted his rifle, just adjusting his grip. But the motion was enough. The figure exploded into motion, moving upslope faster than seemed possible. It covered terrain in seconds that would have taken us 20 minutes with climbing gear. We tracked it with the thermal until it crested the ridge and vanished. It knew what the rifle was, Doug said, and I could hear something like awe in his voice. It recognized a weapon. We found the observation posts in the morning, 8 of them, arranged in a perfect arc around our camp. At each position, there were impressions where it had crouched or sat, and the ground was compressed from repeated use. This wasn't the first time it had watched this spot. At one position, we found where it had been sitting for an extended period. The depression was deep, and around it, smaller marks suggested it had been doing something with its hands. Drawing in the dirt maybe, though rain had washed away any patterns. But the most unsettling discovery was the 9th position, one we hadn't seen it use. This one was only 50 feet from our camp, on a small ledge we hadn't even noticed in the dark. The tracks showed it had been there for at least an hour, perfectly still, just watching us sleep. It could have reached us in seconds if it wanted to. Doug found something else at that closest position, a pile of small stones, stacked deliberately. When we looked closer, we realized they were all quartz, similar to what Riley had been studying. A message? A gift? A warning? We couldn't tell. "We're not hunting anymore," I said, the realization hitting me. "We're being evaluated." That afternoon, we found the cave system. It wasn't on any map, hidden behind a fall of rocks that looked natural but, on closer inspection, had been deliberately arranged. The entrance was big enough for us, but would have been a tight squeeze for something 9 feet tall. Inside was proof that we were dealing with something far more complex than any animal. The cave entrance was hidden behind fallen rocks that looked natural, but weren't. Doug pointed out the tool marks on the stones. Something had deliberately arranged this camouflage. We had to squeeze through sideways, our packs catching on the rough granite. Inside, our flashlights revealed a main chamber about 30 feet deep and 20 wide. The ceiling was blackened from old fires, and the floor was worn smooth from use. But it was the organization that stopped us cold. Along one wall, bones were sorted by type and size. Deer femurs in one pile, ribs in another, skulls arranged by species. Some had been cracked open for marrow, with stone tools that lay nearby, hand axes crudely made but effective, showing someone understood knapping technique. "This is a workshop," Doug said, examining the tools. "Look at the wear patterns. These have been used repeatedly, maintained, sharpened." On a natural shelf in the rock, about 7 feet up, hung Riley's camera bag. Her Nikon was inside, memory card, full, battery dead. I pocketed the memory card immediately, replacing it with a blank from my own camera. Something told me we'd want our own copy of whatever was on there. Deeper in the cave, a passage led to a second chamber. The smell hit us first, musky but not unpleasant, like a barn but earthier. The floor was covered in bedding, layers of pine boughs arranged in 3 distinct areas. The needles were still green, still releasing sap. This wasn't old. This was active, current. Janet found the drawings. On the cave wall, made with charcoal and what looked like ochre, were images. Not primitive stick figures, but careful observations, deer, elk, birds, all anatomically accurate. And among them, human figures, small ones. Some appeared to be wearing backpacks. Hikers, drawn from observation. Tom. Carl's voice was strange. He was shining his light on another section of wall. There were more drawings there, but these were different. They showed the creatures, themselves tall figures with pronounced brows, massive hands, bodies covered in hair. But the disturbing part was what they were doing. In one image, a creature carried a smaller human figure. In another, it appeared to be offering food. These weren't drawings of predation or violence, they were drawings of caretaking. We photographed everything, working fast. The cave felt occupied, like the owners had just stepped out and might return any moment. That feeling intensified when Doug found the fresh scat near the entrance, not human, not bear, something in between. Outside the cave, we picked up the blood trail. Drops every few feet, leading downslope toward a cluster of thick firs. The blood was fresh, maybe 6 hours old. We followed it carefully, Doug taking point with his rifle ready. The trail led us through a natural corridor in the rocks, then opened into another small clearing. And there she was. The shelter was architectural in its sophistication. Branches had been woven together in overlapping layers, sealed with mud that had dried into a weatherproof shell. It was built against a large boulder that formed the back wall, with the entrance facing southeast to catch morning sun. This wasn't an emergency shelter. This was a constructed dwelling that would have taken days to build. Riley lay inside on a bed of fresh pine boughs, covered with what looked like a blanket made of woven grass. Her breathing was steady, pulse-strong, but she was completely unresponsive to our voices or touch. Her clothes were torn but relatively clean. No significant injuries that we could see. Beside her, arranged with obvious care, were offerings. Fresh huckleberries in a bowl made from bark, roots that had been cleaned and peeled, clear water in a hollow gourd, and her camera placed precisely where she could reach it when she woke. "Body temperature's normal," Janet said, checking her vitals. "That's impossible. It hit 28 degrees last night." I turned on Riley's camera, hands shaking slightly. The battery had been dead in the cave, but now it powered up immediately. The memory card showed 417 photos. What I saw on that little LCD screen changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The first photos were Riley's geology work, rock formations, quartz samples, GPS coordinates, carefully documented. Normal field research. Then, starting with photo 143, everything changed. A hand, massive and covered in reddish-brown hair, reaching toward the camera. The fingers were thick but proportionate, with visible fingernails, not claws. The palm showed dermal ridges, like a fingerprint blown up to impossible size. Riley must have been no more than 3 feet away. The next photos showed partial faces, a heavy brow ridge, deep-set eyes that reflected the camera flash in a way human eyes don't. The irises were brown but with an amber ring that caught the light. Intelligence in those eyes, undeniable and unsettling. Photo 228 stopped my breath. A full body shot, though slightly blurred from movement. The creature stood upright, at least 8 feet tall, proportioned like a human but more massive. Hair covered most of its body except the face, palms, and soles of the feet. Female, based on visible mammary tissue, and behind her, partially visible, a smaller figure. A juvenile. "My God," Janet breathed, looking over my shoulder. "It's a family group." The photos progressed like a documentary, the creatures approaching Riley's camp, examining her equipment with obvious curiosity. One image showed a massive hand delicately turning the pages of her field notebook. Another showed the juvenile playing with her geological hammer, supervised by an adult. Then the photos changed location. Cave interiors, the creature's living spaces, tools being made, food being prepared. One haunting image showed an elderly-looking creature, gray-haired and moving slowly, being helped by 2 younger ones. The last 50 photos were the most disturbing. They showed Riley herself, from angles she couldn't have taken. The creatures had learned to use her camera. There she was, sitting among them, eating something from a bark bowl. Another showed her hair being gently groomed by female hands. She looked dazed but unharmed, like someone in shock but cared for. The final photo was dated October 18th, yesterday. It showed Riley lying in the shelter where we'd found her, the camera placed beside her by a massive hand, visible at the edge of the frame. "They documented returning her," Doug said quietly. "They wanted us to know they brought her back." We had to move fast. I called for immediate extraction, claiming medical emergency. While Janet and Carl prepared Riley for transport, Doug and I quickly gathered evidence: hair samples, castings of prints, photos of everything. I kept Riley's camera close, that memory card burning in my pocket like a secret. The shelter revealed more as we carefully extracted Riley. The construction showed advanced understanding of structural engineering. The weaving pattern of the branches created natural insulation pockets. The mud seal included plant fibers for reinforcement. This wasn't instinct. This was learned, refined. Technique passed down and improved over time. Around the shelter, we found more tracks. Multiple individuals had been here, watching as one of them placed Riley inside, watching her be returned to her own kind. The prints showed they'd stayed for hours after placing her, making sure she was safe before leaving. As we carried Riley on the improvised stretcher back toward a clearing suitable for helicopter extraction, I noticed something. The forest was silent again, that oppressive quiet that meant we were being watched. They were following us, making sure we were really taking her. Just before we reached the extraction point, I looked back. For just a moment, silhouetted between two massive firs, I saw them. 3 figures, standing upright, motionless. The largest raised one hand, not a threat, not a warning, a farewell. Then the helicopters arrived, and everything went to hell. 2 helicopters. Not our medical evac, 2 black military-style birds that appeared out of nowhere, landing before our rescue chopper even arrived. Men in tactical gear poured out, but no insignia, no agency identification. The lead guy, clean-shaven, mid-40s, walked straight to me like he knew exactly who was in charge. "Agent Carson," he said, flashing credentials too fast to read. "We'll be taking over the scene. Your medical team can proceed with the extraction, but all evidence remains here. This is my operation. I started, but he cut me off. Not anymore. This area is now under federal jurisdiction. We appreciate your cooperation." They moved with practiced efficiency. One team started photographing everything: our tracks, the shelter, every angle. Another team began bagging evidence with equipment I'd never seen outside of crime scene investigation shows. They had some kind of spectrometer, taking readings from the air, the ground, the shelter materials. While they worked, I saw my chance. Riley's camera sat on the stretcher beside her as Janet prepared her for transport. I knelt beside Riley, pretending to check her pulse, and made the switch. Her memory card went into my pocket, a blank from my camera went into hers. The whole thing took maybe 3 seconds. "Step away from the evidence, Mr. Brenner," Carson said behind me. "Just checking her vitals," I said, standing slowly, hard hammering. Our medical helicopter arrived, and we loaded Riley carefully. Carson stopped me as I moved to board. "You and your team stay. We need to debrief. She'll receive the best care. You have my word. But you stay." They separated us immediately. I was walked to one helicopter, Doug to another. Janet and Carl were kept by the shelter with different agents. Divide and isolate, classic interrogation technique. Carson sat across from me in the helicopter, a tablet in his hands. "Tell me everything from the beginning, every detail." I did, mostly. I told him about the prints, the structures, the cave. I told him about finding Riley, but I didn't mention the memory card burning in my pocket, and I didn't tell him about the figures I'd seen watching us leave. He showed me satellite photos on his tablet, heat signatures in the forest, massive shapes moving through the trees. The images were dated over the past 3 years. They'd been watching this area long before Riley went missing. "What you encountered," Carson said carefully, "is classified under the National Security Act. What you think you saw, you didn't see. What evidence you think you found, you didn't find." Riley Cheng experienced a psychological break and survived through self-rescue. That's the official report. That's bullshit and you know it. He leaned forward. "Mr. Brenner, there are 1,700 people living in the communities around this forest. What do you think happens if word gets out about what's up here? Panic? Hunting parties? Media circus?" He paused. "Or worse, what happens to them if people start invading their territory en masse?" That stopped me. He wasn't protecting a secret, he was protecting them. "They're intelligent," I said quietly. "Yes. How long have you known?" "The government has been aware since the 1960s. There have been incidents, encounters. We've maintained a policy of non-interference and territorial respect. The restricted zones aren't to keep people from discovering them. They're to keep people from disturbing them. And the missing hikers, most are found, as you well know. The few that aren't. Sometimes they're returned, like Miss Cheng. Sometimes they're not. We don't know their selection criteria. We don't know why some are helped and others aren't." He pulled out a thick document. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. Sign it, and you go home. Refuse, and things become complicated." I read it. 12 pages of legal text that basically said if I ever spoke about this, I'd be prosecuted under the Espionage Act. Life in prison, minimum. I signed. What choice did I have? But I kept the memory card. The debriefing continued for 6 hours. They wanted every detail, every measurement, every observation. Carson had a team of scientists on video link asking questions about the structures, the tools, the cave arrangement. They were particularly interested in the drawings on the cave walls. The interaction patterns, one scientist said through the screen. Did they seem protective of the human subject? I thought about those photos on Riley's camera, her being groomed, fed, carefully tended. Yes, protective. No aggressive displays, no threatening behavior. They could have killed us anytime they wanted. They didn't. Carson showed me more files. Incident reports from across the Pacific Northwest, each one marked with red dots on a map. The dates went back decades. The Patricia Holmes case from 1994, a child missing for 6 days, found in perfect health in a shelter similar to Riley's. The Marcus Chen incident from 2008, a photographer who disappeared for 2 weeks, found with no memory but hundreds of photos on his camera that were immediately classified. Every one of these cases, Carson said, followed the same pattern. Destroyed campsite, evidence of observation, then either return or he didn't finish. How many weren't returned? Since we've been tracking, 43 confirmed interactions, 31 returned alive. 8 found deceased from natural causes, exposure, falls, animal attacks unrelated to the subjects. 4 never found. Subjects, that's what you call them? We use various designations. The official classification is unidentified terrestrial primate, but most of us just say subjects. He pulled up another screen, a budget document with numbers that made my head spin. We spend $12 million annually maintaining the restricted zones, monitoring the populations, and managing incidents. There are response teams like mine stationed across 6 states. Populations? How many are there? We estimate between 600 and 800 individuals across the Pacific Northwest. Family groups of 8 to 12. They're nomadic within established territories, following seasonal patterns we're still mapping. Janet and Carl were brought over, looking shell-shocked. Doug came last, his face grim. Your team performed admirably, Carson said. You maintained discipline, didn't panic, and successfully retrieved the missing person. Officially, that's all that happened. You found Riley Cheng suffering from exposure and dehydration. She's expected to make a full recovery. What about the evidence we collected? Doug asked. What evidence? You found a lost hiker. Nothing more. They had us sign individual NDAs, each one customized with our names, social security numbers, addresses. The message was clear. They knew exactly who we were and how to find us. Before they released us, Carson pulled me aside. That was good work, switching the memory cards. My blood went cold. We let you keep it, he continued. Consider it insurance. You stay quiet, we stay away. But if those photos ever surface, if you ever break this NDA, we'll know exactly where they came from. He handed me a business card with just a phone number. If you ever encounter them again, call immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. They flew us back to Enterprise that night. The official report was already written. Riley Cheng had gotten disoriented, sheltered in a cave system, and was found suffering from psychological trauma, exposure. The search had taken 4 days. No unusual incidents. Sheriff Wade Colburn was waiting when we landed. He took one look at our faces and didn't ask any questions. Later, privately, he told me this wasn't his first federal cleanup. There were protocols in place, had been for years. Those restricted zones, he said, we don't patrol them, haven't for decades. Anybody goes missing up there, we call it in and wait for the feds. That's the deal. How many people know? The ones who need to. The ones who've seen things. The ones who keep their mouths shut. He looked at me steadily. Welcome to the club, Tom. I went home that night to my empty house, put the memory card in my safe, and tried to convince myself it was over. It wasn't. 6 weeks later, December 2nd, 2019, I met Dr. Yuki Tanaka at a coffee shop in Corvallis, halfway between Enterprise and his lab at Oregon State University. He was nervous, kept checking his phone, looking over his shoulder. I'd called him using a burner phone, mentioned I had biological samples that needed analysis, nothing more. Tom, what you're asking me to do could end my career, he said after I explained what I needed. Just look at them. Tell me what you see. I slid him a small cooler containing the hair samples I'd collected, along with a USB drive containing select photos from Riley's camera, just the hands and partial facial features, nothing that showed the full creatures. He stared at one photo for a long time. The dermal ridges on these hands, the proportions. This isn't a known primate. That's what I need you to confirm. 3 days later, he called me at 2 in the morning, his voice shaking. Tom, you need to see this. His lab was dark, except for one workstation. On the monitor were DNA sequences, graphs, comparative analyses. I understood maybe a tenth of it, but his explanation was clear enough. The mitochondrial DNA shows a divergence from the human line approximately 1.8 million years ago, he said, pulling up a evolutionary tree diagram. But here's the thing, there are markers that suggest continued parallel evolution, similar environmental pressures, similar adaptations, but on a separate branch. English, Yuki. They're cousins, close cousins. Closer to us than chimps or bonobos, but they diverged before Homo erectus. They're not Neanderthals or Denisovans, they're something else entirely. Something that never left the forests, never needed tools beyond basic ones, never needed agriculture because the forest provided everything. He showed me more data, muscle fiber density suggesting enormous strength, bone composition indicating resistance to cold, sensory adaptations for low-light environments. The government has to know about this, I said. Oh, they know. He pulled up another screen. I ran the sequences through GenBank, the public DNA database. The search got flagged immediately. Within a 2-hour, I had emails from the NSF asking about my research. Then my department chair called, wanting to know what I was working on. What did you tell them? Contaminated sample from a known primate. But Tom, they're watching now. My computer's being monitored, I'm sure of it. We copied everything to encrypted drives that night. Yuki kept one, I kept one, and we agreed on a protocol. If either of us was approached, we'd destroy everything. 4 days later, Yuki's university email was deactivated. His phone was disconnected. When I drove to Corvallis to check on him, his office was empty, cleaned out. The department secretary said he'd taken an unexpected sabbatical family emergency in Japan. I called the number he'd given me for his parents in Hokkaido. They hadn't heard from him in months. The encrypted drive was all I had left. Proof that we'd discovered something science said couldn't exist. A parallel line of human evolution, living alongside us, hiding in the shrinking wilderness. Before he vanished, Yuki had said something that haunted me. Tom, if they've survived this long beside us without being discovered, they're either incredibly intelligent or we're incredibly blind. Maybe both. January 15th, 2020. Portland, Oregon. Riley was living under the name Rebecca Chen in a studio apartment near Portland State University. It had taken me weeks to find her. Carson's people had done a thorough job creating her new identity. But SAR coordinators have connections, and eventually I tracked her down through a mutual friend at OHSU Medical Center. She answered the door, looking healthier but different. Her hair was shorter, dyed darker. She recognized me immediately, and for a moment, I thought she might slam the door. I'm not supposed to talk to you, she said quietly. I know. Can I come in anyway? Her apartment was sparse but comfortable. What caught my eye were the drawings, sheets of paper covered in geometric patterns tacked to every wall. The same symbols we'd seen in the cave, in the structures, rendered over and over in pencil, pen, charcoal. I can't stop drawing them, she said, following my gaze. The doctors said it's a coping mechanism for trauma, but I know better. We sat at her small kitchen table. She made tea with hands that trembled slightly. What do you remember? I asked. Nothing. Everything. Fragments that don't make sense. She pulled out a notebook, showed me pages of sketches. I dream about being carried, about huge hands that were gentle, about eyes that looked at me with curiosity, compassion. I can't tell. One drawing showed her perspective from being held trees passing overhead, a massive arm cradling her. The smell, she continued. Sometimes I wake up and I smell it, musky, wild, but not threatening. My window was open last week, second story, and there were prints on the fire escape, too big to be human. You think they're checking on you? She nodded. 3 times now, always after nightmares. I wake up screaming, and within an hour, that smell drifts through my window, like they can sense my distress from miles away. She showed me more drawings, detailed sketches of hands, faces partially hidden by hair, a family group including what looked like children. The photos on my camera, she said suddenly. They told me the camera was damaged, no recoverable images. But I know there were photos. I remember them teaching me, showing me things. I made a decision. From my bag, I pulled out prints I'd made from her memory card, just a few, the clearest ones. Her hands shook as she took them. Tears ran down her face as she looked at image after image. This, she pointed to a photo of the juvenile. This one was curious about my hair, kept touching it, gentle as a child. And this one, an elderly female, she brought me food every day, roots and berries, already cleaned and prepared. Riley, why did an elder? What they take you? She was quiet for a long moment. I don't think they took me. I think I was hurt, maybe fell, and they found me. The tent being shredded, that wasn't them attacking, that was them trying to get to me after something else already had. Something else? There are claw marks on my back. 4 parallel scars the doctors couldn't explain. They thought maybe a bear, but the spacing is wrong. The creatures, they were protecting me from something. That's why they kept me. To keep me safe until my people came. As I left, she grabbed my arm. Mr. Brenner, we're not supposed to know about them, are we? That's the real secret. Not that they exist, but that they're watching out for us sometimes. That maybe they always have been. Walking to my car, I smelled it faint but unmistakable. That musky, wild scent. They were watching, they're always watching. Present day, November 2024. I've documented 17 similar cases now. 17 people who went missing in restricted zones across Oregon and Washington, all found alive days later with no memory, all drawing the same symbols when they think no one's watching. The patterns are consistent: destroyed campsites, suggesting violence that never touched the missing person, sophisticated shelters that would take a team to build, body temperatures that stayed normal in freezing conditions, and always, that same federal response. Within hours of discovery, my property backs up to national forest land, 20 acres near Joseph, Oregon. 3 years ago, the wood knocks started. Always at dusk, always 3 knocks, sometimes answered from different directions. I leave apples from my trees at the forest edge. They're always gone by morning. Last winter, I found stones on my porch, quartz mostly, but arranged in patterns, the same patterns Riley draws, the same ones in the cave. I've kept them all, lined up on my mantle like a message I can't decode. Doug Hutchins killed himself 2 years ago. The note said he couldn't live with the secrets anymore. Janet and Carl moved to Florida, as far from the forests as they could get. Sheriff Colburn retired early, won't talk about why. But I'm still here, still listening to the knocks, still finding gifts of stones. Carson called me once, 3 years ago. "You're keeping your end of the bargain," he said. "We appreciate that." Then, quieter. "They know who you are, Brenner. The ones who helped find the girl. You're marked as safe." I asked him what he meant. He hung up. The restricted zones keep expanding. Check the Forest Service maps, huge areas marked as watershed protection or habitat preservation, with no public access. The government isn't hiding monsters. They're managing a relationship with another intelligence, one that was here first. The self-rescue cases are increasing too. People vanishing for days, found in perfect health with no memory. The official reports all read the same: psychological distress, temporary disorientation, lucky to be alive. They're not lucky. They're chosen, protected, returned. I don't know why they sometimes help us. Maybe they recognize something in certain people, some quality we don't even know we have. Maybe they're trying to communicate, to bridge a gap between our worlds before it's too late. But I know this: they're watching. Right now, as you read this, they're out there in the forests we've pushed them into, living their parallel lives, occasionally reaching across the divide to help a lost human. The stones on my porch aren't random. They're a reminder. We share this world whether we admit it or not. And sometimes, just sometimes, they still choose to be our guardians.